Hello, my name is Marjorie, and I'm 67 years old. At my own daughter's wedding, she raised a glass to toast me and called me an old, smelly woman. My son-in-law laughed. No one stood up for me. But what they didn't know is that I remember everything, and I wasn't about to disappear quietly. Stay with me, because this story doesn't end in shame. It begins with a toast and ends with something they never saw coming. To my mother, Natalie raised her glass. The woman who taught me everything, including how not to grow old like that. The room burst into gentle, polite laughter, the kind that wraps cruelty in crystal glass and white tablecloths. Marjorie didn't laugh. She clutched the soft red wool in her lap, her fingers curling tightly around the frayed ends of the scarf. Years ago, it had been a birthday gift, one Natalie tossed aside with a look of disdain. Now it was all she brought with her. She shouldn't have come. The wedding was held in a charming colonial-style villa nestled in the hills of Vermont. Spring had painted the garden in bursts of yellow daffodils and lilac blooms. The scent of peonies hovered in the breeze like perfume. Laughter floated through French doors and clinked off champagne flutes. Inside, the air was warm, the chandeliers glowing, but Marjorie felt only the quiet cold blooming behind her ribs. She stood alone at the edge of the festivities. No one greeted her when she arrived. Her name was printed on a placard in a shaky, impersonal font, directing her to a small table tucked behind a floral partition, 2 steps from the guest bathroom. The scent of disinfectant and distant plumbing draped her like a second shawl. From her seat, she had no view of the ceremony, just the echo of it, laughter claps, and the muffled violin strings. She'd crocheted Natalie's christening bonnet by hand. She'd raised her alone after Natalie's father walked away. Now her daughter stood in satin and pearls, hand in hand, with her new husband making a toast that cut clean through 37 years. David smirked at the punchline. He didn't even glance her way. Across the room, Ava, her granddaughter, caught Marjorie's eye. The girl's brows knit together in something like confusion, maybe concern. But then the DJ spun up a lively track, and a pair of cousins whisked her away to the dance floor. Marjorie stayed seated through the toasts, through the cake, through the photos. She kept silent when a distant cousin leaned down to say, "Natalie's gown is stunning, isn't it? You must be so proud." She nodded. Then she stood. Slowly, carefully, with dignity, worn thin like an old quilt. She placed the envelope on the empty plate "Happy Wedding" in silver cursive, a card she had bought on sale, with trembling hands and too much hope. She left it there unopened. She walked out through the same door she came in, invisible, as the wind rustling the cherry blossoms outside. "I never meant to come back here again." But something she said, it stayed. Marjorie poured tea for herself, as if someone still sat across from her. But the other cup had long gone cold. She placed the porcelain teapot back on its stand with a soft clink, then slowly eased into the kitchen chair. The cushions sighed beneath her. Before her sat 2 cups, one with steam curling gently into the light, the other still and silent. She stared at it, waiting for a gesture that would not come. The morning sun slipped in through the window, falling across the warped wooden floorboards and the uneven edge of the kitchen counter. Dust caught the light, floating like forgotten promises. In the corner, a radiator hissed, once then fell quiet. The house had a language of its own. Creaks, groans, quiet resistance to time. She reached for the other cup and ran her fingers along the faint crack that spiraled out from the rim. Natalie had dropped it once years ago during an argument about missed piano recitals and Marjorie's constant meddling. Marjorie had never glued the crack. It felt honest somehow. The teacup, like her, was chipped but holding. She stood and opened a cupboard. The scent of lavender sachets and old wood rose to meet her. On the second shelf, behind a half-used tin of peppermint leaves, was a photograph Natalie no more than 8, grinning with a missing front tooth arms, flung around a scruffy dog that had only lived a year. The photo had curled at the edges, as if time had slowly tried to fold it away. She placed the photo on the table beside the tea angled just so. A knock at the back door made her flinch. It was Mrs. Delaney from next door, holding a small container of oatmeal cookies wrapped in foil. "Just thought I'd drop these off," she said, already stepping back. "Oh, thank you," Marjorie murmured. "You looked so elegant the other day at the wedding. I saw you leaving." "Everything all right?" Marjorie nodded. "Just tired, that's all." "Well," Mrs. Delaney offered a tight smile, "you know where I am?" After the door shut, Marjorie sat down again. The tea had cooled. As she leaned to clear the table, something shifted beneath the chair. A faint scrape. She crouched down slowly, knees protesting, and pulled out the wedding invitation, the one Natalie had sent, with no handwritten note, just a typed address and time. It must have fallen during the reception. Or maybe she'd tucked it into her purse and forgotten. She held it in her lap and stared. If I disappeared tomorrow, who would notice first? A laugh escaped her lips, short, breathless wrong. She stood abruptly and walked to the small desk near the window. Her fingers hovered over the address book, then moved to the phone. She dialed the bank. 5 rings. Then, a soft, automated voice greeted her. She pressed the options, waited. Then finally, a voice human asked for her details. She gave her name, her late husband's name, the joint account they had opened 32 years ago. The representative went silent. "Then, ma'am, the account is now under sole authorization of Natalie Cooper. The change was confirmed 3 months ago." Marjorie's breath caught. "I never gave them permission to do that. Or did I?" Forget, the family photo had been trimmed on the right edge. The place where Natalie once stood had been cleanly removed, leaving only a sliver of lace sleeve and an empty shadow. It used to hang in the center of the living room wall, framed in rosewood, surrounded by fading wallpaper and years of birthdays, Thanksgivings, and forgotten mornings. Now it rested in a drawer, face down beneath a pile of recipe clippings and unopened holiday cards. Marjorie closed the drawer softly, but the sound still echoed louder than she intended. The sun had already slipped low in the sky when Ava appeared unannounced at the side door, her scarf slightly askew and a bouquet of daffodils in hand. "Hi, Grandma," she said gently, stepping in with the ease of someone who remembered where the creaky tiles were. "Oh, sweetheart." Marjorie blinked in surprise. "You didn't call." "I missed you." Ava shrugged, setting the flowers in the chipped blue vase on the table. "Thought I'd drop by." They sat together in the kitchen, the soft clatter of teaspoons and kettle hum filling the quiet. The house felt both fuller and more fragile with Ava in it, like something long frozen had been briefly warmed. Ava's gaze wandered around the room. Her eyes landed on a framed picture lying on the nearby counter. "Grandma, why is my mum cut out of this photo?" Marjorie's hand paused mid-stir. "Oh," she said too quickly, mice. Got into the drawer. Chewed the edge. Ava tilted her head. "Really?" Just where Mum was standing, Marjorie offered a tight smile and stood up to reach for a tin of sugar cookies. The conversation drifted to school books and how cold the spring had been. But Ava's eyes kept returning to that photo. Later, while Marjorie sorted linens in the other room, Ava wandered to the old secretary desk in the hallway. She opened the bottom drawer, curious not invasive, and saw a folder labelled Property and Legal. She flipped it open. deeds, statements, tax letters. One line caught her attention. Title transfer. Sole owner Natalie Cooper. Her brows furrowed. She checked the date. Less than a year ago. Behind the folder was another document, a copy of a power of attorney form. Her mother's name appeared at the bottom in thick, flowing script. Marjorie's signature sat above, but it looked off, hesitant, wavering almost as if written by someone imitating. Ava carried the paper carefully into the kitchen. "Grandma," she asked softly, "did you sign this?" Marjorie adjusted her glasses, studied the page. Her lips moved silently, eyes narrowing. "But I never signed this." A silence fell between them, dense and quiet. Ava took a slow breath. "Grandma, I think someone's changed things behind your back." Ava knocked twice. There was no answer, but she knew Marjorie was standing just inside, silent, waiting, listening. The door between them creaked with time. Ava waited a moment longer, then pressed her palm gently against the frame. "Grandma," she said barely above a whisper, "I just want to talk." Inside the house felt dimmer than usual. The thick curtains in the living room had been drawn, muffling the afternoon light. Shadows rested heavily in the corners, and the air carried the faint, settled scent of rosewood and dust. On the coffee table, the same teacup from 2 days ago sat untouched, its contents now cold and dark, like time had simply stopped flowing in this room. Marjorie's voice came faintly from the hall. "I didn't hear you come in?" Ava turned. Her grandmother stood near the staircase, cardigan wrapped tightly, one hand gripping the banister. "I didn't mean to startle you," Ava said softly. Marjorie gave a small nod, her eyes flitting toward the kitchen, away from the stack of papers Ava had brought earlier. "I've just been tired. That's all." Ava stepped forward slowly. "Grandma, I found something yesterday. In the documents. About the house?" A pause. Marjorie didn't respond. "I don't think it's in your name anymore." The silence between them thickened. Ava didn't push. She waited. Finally, Marjorie's eyes lifted, cautious and weary. "It used to be. Harold and I, we signed everything together." "I believe you," Ava said. "But we need to find the originals." "Would it be all right if we checked the basement?" Marjorie hesitated. Her fingers curled tighter around the banister. "I haven't been down there since he passed." "I can go with you," Ava offered. "We'll just look through the old files. That's all." For a long moment, it seemed like Marjorie would refuse. Then, with a slight nod, she turned and led the way. The basement door groaned as it opened, revealing a steep flight of wooden steps that disappeared into darkness. Ava flicked the switch, but the light didn't come on. "Breaker's been fickle," Marjorie muttered. Using the flashlight on her phone, Ava led the way down the beam, slicing through floating dust motes and cobwebs. At the base of the stairs, cardboard boxes lined the walls, some sagging from moisture, others still taped shut like time capsules. The air was colder here. Damp. "This one," Marjorie said, pointing to a plastic bin with a faded label, "Mortgage and Insurance." They knelt together on the concrete floor. Ava opened the box, sifting through brittle folders and tax returns from the late 80s. Then she found it the original deed, yellowed but legible, with both Harold and Marjorie's signatures in tidy ink. Then another folder, updated title transfer, 2021. Ava flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the form, then froze. "Grandma," she said, voice tight, "this was signed over to Natalie. Over a year ago." Marjorie took the folder with trembling hands. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, absorbing each line like a blow. "But that was before." She blinked. "Before the wedding. Before she even asked me to move in with her." Ava said nothing. She let the silence speak. Marjorie's breath quickened, her shoulders sinking. She planned this, she whispered. All of it. Even before the dress fittings. Before the invitation. She already had this in motion. Her voice trailed off the paper, rustling softly in her hands. She looked up at Ava, her face pale and unreadable. So, she planned it all along. If anything ever feels wrong, call me. The handwriting was precise, underlined once just below the number on a cream-coloured business card. Gregory Owens, attorney at law. The card had yellowed slightly, the corners curling as if it too had grown old waiting. Marjorie held it in her hand, thumb brushing over the faded print. Her husband's voice echoed in her memory, calm, deliberate. Gregory is the only one I trust to keep secrets. At the time, she hadn't questioned the seriousness of it. It was just another precaution Harold took, like labeling old tax folders or keeping backups of every utility bill. But now, the paper trail had led her to uncertainty. Her home signed away. Her accounts shifted. And the ache in her chest, was it grief or betrayal? She sat by the kitchen window, the morning light filtered through lace curtains. The phone sat just inches from her hand. She hesitated. Once she dialed, there would be no undoing. The old fears crept in. What if I'm just confused? What if it's nothing? But Ava's words from the basement rang sharp and clear. Grandma, I think someone changed everything without telling you. Marjorie dialed. A soft, professional voice answered. Gregory Owens' office. How may I help you? She cleared her throat. This is Marjorie Ellison. I'd like to speak with Mr. Owens. Hold one moment, please. A few seconds passed, then came a deeper voice, rich and gravelly. Marjorie. I was wondering when you'd call. A pause. You remember me? She asked. I remember you standing beside Harold at the reading of his will. I remember the way you folded your hands so tightly I thought you might snap your wedding ring. A half laugh, half sigh escaped her lips. You always did notice too much. Still do, he said. Come by. We'll talk. The law office sat tucked between a bakery and an antique store in the neighbouring town. Nothing had changed. The same worn, brass sign. The same doorbell chime that sounded like a typewriter key. Inside, the smell of paper and old books enveloped her. A young woman behind the front desk gave her a professional smile. Mrs. Ellison, Mr. Owens is expecting you. Gregory stood as she entered his office, tall, lean, his once dark hair now a cloud of white. His suit was pressed, his tie neat, but it was the eyes that hadn't aged, steel blue, sharp, patient. You look exactly the same, he said, motioning her to the leather chair across his desk. You look older, she replied with a small smile. He chuckled. Takes one to know one. They exchanged pleasantries briefly. Then she opened her bag and slid out the copy of the power of attorney, the one Ava had found. I need to know if this is real. Gregory took the paper, adjusted his glasses, and read slowly. He flipped to the signature page, then reached into his file drawer and pulled out a manila folder. From it, he produced a scanned image, the original will Harold had left, notarized, dated 2018. Another page, a power of attorney Marjorie had signed years ago for medical emergencies only. He compared them carefully. Marjorie, he said slowly, this signature on Natalie's document. It's yours, but it isn't how you sign. What do you mean you've always curled your M at the bottom? This one straight angle. Clean. Like someone traced it. She leaned forward. But it's my name. Yes, but I never notarized this version. It wasn't signed in front of me. Which means he tapped the document. This was submitted separately, likely switched before being filed. Her mouth went dry. So what does that mean? It means someone submitted an alternate version, one that gave your daughter legal access to your accounts. And perhaps more? Gregory placed his hands flat on the desk. I can help you, Marjorie. But the question is, do you want to take this all the way? She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the lawyer, but the old friend who had once sat across from Harold sipping scotch and arguing over tax codes. He wasn't offering rescue. He was offering clarity. Gregory leaned in slightly, voice soft but firm. Do you want me to help you get it all back? In the back of the drawer, tucked between an old music box and a dried corsage, Marjorie found a small envelope yellowed by time. She opened it with gentle fingers, careful not to tear the brittle edges. Inside a ballet ticket, March 14th, 1987. 7:00 p.m., The Sleeping Beauty, Grand Theatre. She held it like something fragile and dangerous all at once. That was the night, she murmured. Ava looked up from the corner of the room where she was gently dusting the bookshelf. What night? Marjorie sat down on the edge of Natalie's old bed. The room remained nearly untouched. Pale pink walls, a faded poster of a ballerina mid-pirouette, a vanity table with a missing drawer handle. Dust clung to the edges of everything, as if time had simply decided to stop here. I bought this ticket for Natalie's first recital, she said. She was supposed to dance in the final group. I promised I'd be there. You weren't? Ava asked softly, setting down the cloth. Marjorie shook her head. I was on call at the hospital. An emergency came in, a boy hit by a car. I lost track of time. By the time I looked at the clock, the performance had ended. A pause. I drove straight there anyway, she continued, but she was gone. I found out later she had waited at the stage door for over an hour. Then she walked home alone. She was only 7. Ava sat beside her, quiet. She didn't speak to me for 2 days, Marjorie whispered. And when she did, she said, It's okay, Mum. I know your job is more important than me. Shh. A long silence settled over the room. I tried to explain, Marjorie added. Tried to tell her I didn't choose the hospital over her, but she never quite believed me after that. Ava's expression shifted the edge of blame, softening into something more complex. She looked around the room again, the ballet shoes hanging from the doorknob, the music box that no longer played a drawer slightly ajar with notebooks inside. She never told me this, Ava said. She wouldn't, Marjorie replied. Some things. Natalie kept close, turned into armor. The sunlight filtered through the blinds in dusty strips, highlighting motes that danced gently between them. The ticket in Marjorie's hand trembled slightly. Maybe she said almost to herself, She's hated me since that night. Ava reached out, took her hand, not to comfort, but to connect. Her grip was firm. But even if she did, that doesn't give her the right to take everything from you. Underneath the sink, among crumpled paper towels and a bottle of bleach, Ava saw it, a flash of red wool tangled in a plastic grocery bag like trash. She reached in and pulled it out. The red scarf, hand-knitted with a slightly uneven pattern and softened from years of use, still held the faintest scent of lavender. A loose thread dangled at the hem, and there was a small stain near the edge, but it was unmistakable. Her grandmother had worn it to the wedding. Ava remembered how tightly she'd clutched it, as though it were the only warmth she had left. What's this doing here? Ava's voice was even, but her hand tightened around the wool. Natalie didn't look up from her phone. She was standing across the kitchen, glossy countertops, shining her heels, clicking softly on the tile. Oh, that, Natalie said, glancing over briefly. It was in one of the boxes. I think it had some mold or something. I meant to toss it. Mold. Ava examined the scarf again. It was dry. Worn, yes, but far from ruined. Natalie shrugged. I didn't want to keep everything, Ava. Some of it. It's just clutter now. The word lingered. Clutter. Ava folded the scarf, slowly pressing the wool into a small square. I'll take it, she said. Natalie didn't protest. Ava walked out shortly after the scarf tucked under her arm. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but the silence that followed felt louder than any slammed argument could. Back at Marjorie's house, the late afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long golden strips on the kitchen floor. Ava said nothing as she handed over the scarf. Marjorie took it gently. Her fingers brushed the familiar texture, the loops she had once knitted over cold winter evenings. She didn't cry. Instead, she laid it on the table, smoothed out the corners, then walked to the hallway. She opened the small cabinet beneath the framed photo of her late husband, lit a candle, and placed the folded scarf beside his watch and wedding band. Ava stood in the doorway, watching. Marjorie stared at the candle for a long while before whispering, "If she's willing to throw away memories, she's brave enough to erase me from everything. I remember clearly. She didn't sign a thing. I even poured her some lemonade that day." Martin's voice was calm but firm, the kind of certainty that comes only from a mind that pays attention to the small things. Marjorie sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her fingers twisting together in her lap. Ava perched beside her notebook in hand. The living room was lined with books and stacks of hand-labeled notebooks, everything neatly arranged but lived in. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and lemon oil. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the background, filling the silences without intruding. I was outside in the garden when Natalie pulled up. Martin continued pushing his glasses up his nose. She had someone with her. A woman, youngish, wore dark sunglasses, never introduced herself. Marjorie looked down. I remember that. I thought maybe I'd just forgotten. Martin leaned forward. No, ma'am. You hadn't. They came in, made small talk. You were tired, sat on the recliner. I brought lemonade. Natalie said she needed a signature, but then changed her mind, said she'd come back another day. Ava's pen stopped moving. Do you remember the date? Martin chuckled softly. You're in luck. I jot everything down. He shuffled to a side cabinet and retrieved a small spiral-bound notepad. The pages were lined in faded blue ink, filled with compact, orderly handwriting. Here, he said, flipping to a page near the middle. March 28th, 2021. Natalie and unknown woman. 15 minutes. No signature. Lemonade served. He looked at Marjorie. You weren't yourself that day. Seemed a bit off, but polite as always. Marjorie's face had gone pale. That's the same day on the document. Ava nodded slowly, which means Martin didn't need to finish. The silence in the room grew dense, like the moment just before a storm. I never signed it, Marjorie whispered. And if I'd known what she was planning. Martin laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. Now you do. And now it's time to do something about it. Ava closed her notebook, her voice quiet but steady. Then we have a witness, and a case of fraud ready to be opened. Dear Natalie Bennett, I know everything now. Marjorie read the words aloud under her breath, letting the ink dry before continuing. The pen in her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to say. The living room clock ticked evenly loud in the evening quiet. The lamplight threw soft shadows against the walls, casting a golden hue over the notepaper spread across the table. Ava sat nearby, respectfully silent, only offering the occasional suggestion on phrasing when asked. Marjorie had insisted on writing the letter by hand. No typing, no emails. It had to be personal. It had to be felt. She paused for a moment, then continued. I remember the day you stood in the rain, clutching your ballet shoes, waiting for a mother who never showed. I never forgot. I never forgave myself. Her hand stilled again. The memory of that day had haunted her more than any confrontation could. Natalie's small, hopeful face turned toward the street, waiting. Marjorie had been stuck in the ER fighting to save a life, and in doing so had missed a moment that could never be undone. But a mistake, however deep, does not erase a life. It does not justify stealing the legacy your father and I built with sweat and sacrifice. Ava leaned forward slightly, watching as her grandmother's back straightened. The frailty in Marjorie's frame seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quiet strength. You have two choices, Natalie. The first, return what you took. No lawyers, no courts, just truth. The second, I'll see you in court with evidence, with witnesses, and with every last ounce of dignity I still possess. The lines were crisp, deliberate. Marjorie's pen moved without hesitation now. At the bottom, she signed Marjorie Evelyn Bennett, Mother. She stared at the signature a long while before folding the letter, sliding it into a cream envelope, and sealing it with a careful press of her fingers. I don't want her to think I'm angry, she said quietly to Ava, who nodded. You're not. You're just done being silent. 2 days passed. No message, no call, no apology. Instead, a thick white envelope arrived by courier. Ava signed for it and handed it to her grandmother with an uneasy look. Marjorie opened it with steady hands. Inside was a legal notice, a petition for a competency hearing, an official request to have Marjorie's mental faculties evaluated by the court. She stared at the words, letting them settle like dust in an abandoned room. Natalie hadn't written back, but she had answered. The court has scheduled a hearing to assess your cognitive capacity. Marjorie read the sentence twice, then once more aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. She held the letter with both hands, the fine paper trembling slightly in her grip. Outside, a gentle drizzle painted the windows in faint grey streaks. The air smelled of weak tea and wet earth. Ava sat across from her, her face flushing with disbelief. She filed for guardianship. That's what this is, isn't it? Marjorie nodded slowly. She wants the court to declare me unfit. Ava stood up abruptly, pacing. She wants control, full control. This isn't about concern. It's about shutting you down before you can fight back. But Marjorie wasn't shaken. She sipped her tea, though her fingers quivered just enough to spill a drop on the rim. I knew she might do this, she said quietly. That's why I started writing it all down. She rose with a steadiness that surprised even herself and walked to the corner cabinet in the hallway. From behind a stack of linens, she retrieved a worn, leather-bound notebook. The spine had split from use pages, yellowed and curved. Ava opened the cover, March 2021, the first entry. Each page was dated, detailing visits from Natalie, what time she arrived, what she said, who accompanied her. There were notes about conversations, observations of her mood, even a mention of the sunglasses-wearing woman who never gave her name. I've been tracking the inconsistencies, Marjorie explained. Not because I planned for court, but because something inside me said one day I'd need to remember it all. And I didn't trust myself to. A knock on the door. Ava went to open it. Gregory Owens stood there, umbrella-dripping grey coat buttoned up to his chin. He nodded at both women and stepped inside, shaking off the rain. I read the notice, he said, pulling the letter from his briefcase. They're moving quickly. You'll need to demonstrate competence, not just live it. Marjorie straightened in her chair. Then we begin? Gregory looked at her, really looked. This will not be easy. They'll ask invasive questions. They'll try to twist silence into senility. I know, Marjorie replied. So let's be ready. That afternoon, they began recording. Marjorie sat in front of a small recorder Ava had borrowed from the university. She spoke clearly, recounting the events of the past year. Each day they added more. Dates, names, reactions. Memory is my witness, Marjorie said into the mic. And now it's on record. That night before bed, she stood at the window watching the rain ease into mist. She turned to Ava. If this is the game they've chosen to play, then I won't retreat anymore. Mr. Martin, Gregory Owens, and Ava? Marjorie said the names aloud as she wrote them carefully in blue ink on a lined notepad. Each name held weight, not just in the legal sense, but in memory, in trust, in time. The living room was dim, except for the warm glow of the reading lamp casting a quiet golden pool over the scattered documents folders and photographs that now filled the table. It no longer looked like a place for tea and quiet afternoons. It looked like a command center. Gregory sat across from her, his tie slightly loosened, sleeves rolled up. A man of precision, yet he had learned to move gently in Marjorie's space. We're not just proving competency, he reminded her. We're proving narrative, a history, one only you remember. And that memory is your greatest asset. Ava sat beside her grandmother, phone in hand, recording Marjorie as she recounted events from the past 2 years. Her voice was steady, layered with the texture of time, not dramatic, but unwavering. When did Natalie last visit unannounced? Gregory asked. Marjorie thought for a moment, then nodded. July 14th. She came with a woman in sunglasses. Didn't introduce her. Gregory glanced at a timeline he was building. That's the day after the supposed signing of the new power of attorney. Martin saw them. Marjorie's lips curled in a half smile. He called me yesterday, said he'll testify. In her lap was a letter from Martin, 3 pages of handwritten notes he'd compiled, dated entries and his recollections. Not all of it would hold in court, Gregory had warned, but as a character witness, his steadiness could tip the scale. Later that evening, Marjorie sat alone and wrote another letter. This one was not to a lawyer or a friend. It was addressed to the presiding judge. Her hand moved with intent, not desperation. Your Honor, I am an old woman, but I am not a forgetful one. I remember the feel of my husband's hand. I remember every inch of the house I've lived in for 4 decades. I remember when my daughter's voice changed from calling me Mom to just her in conversation. She paused. I ask only this, let me speak. Let me tell the court what I remember in my own voice before I am told what I've forgotten. She folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it with a deliberate press of her thumb. From across the room, Ava watched her. Do you want me to mail it? Marjorie looked up, the fire in her eyes, lit but quiet. Not yet. Tomorrow. Let the ink settle first. The next morning, the house hummed with quiet purpose. Ava brewed coffee while Marjorie reviewed the court documents again. Gregory was due to arrive at noon, and they would rehearse every possible question the court might ask. But before anything else, Marjorie walked to her writing desk and placed the sealed envelope, the letter to the judge, into a small box labelled, "To be handled personally." She didn't trust couriers with this. This letter was not evidence. It was presence. Gregory arrived carrying a folder thicker than before. I've contacted the clerk, he said. The judge received your request. There's no promise yet, but it made an impression. Ava glanced at her grandmother. That's because it came from the only person who truly lived through it. Gregory smiled gently. Exactly. They sat in the living room again, the scene now familiar. Folders, open voices, low, the ticking of the clock, weaving between thoughts. Marjorie answered Gregory's sample questions. What's today's date? Who is the president? What medications are you on with precision and a hint of wry humour? Then Ava set up her phone once more. This time she recorded a longer piece. Just speak from the beginning, she said. Tell the story as if it's just me and you. Marjorie took a breath. My name is Marjorie Evelyn Bennett. I was born in 1955. I married Alan Bennett in 1979. We moved into this house in 1983. Natalie was born in 85. She used to love peaches. She hated ballet shoes with straps. She cried when I missed her performance, and I carried that ache ever since. But I never stopped loving her, even when she stopped calling me Mom. Ava blinked back tears. Marjorie didn't pause. I remember when she came with a stranger. I remember the day my name disappeared from the bank account. I remember the red scarf. And I remember the silence. Long, sharp, deliberate silence, as if I were no longer meant to speak. She looked straight at the camera. Well, I am speaking now. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something ancient, something unshakable. That evening, Ava placed all the recordings and notes into a digital folder, backing it up in 2 places. Gregory sent the witness summons to Martin, who confirmed via email that he would appear. They even had a notarized timeline from Martin's journals, cross-referencing dates with Gregory's records. The list of witnesses, simple and clear, remained taped to the side of the refrigerator. Martin, neighbor; Gregory Owens, attorney; Ava, granddaughter. 3 names, 3 memories that still held fast. As they sat down for dinner, just soup and crackers, Ava said softly, "We're not just proving you're sane, Grandma." Marjorie tilted her head. "No." Ava smiled. "We're proving you're the only one who really remembers." Marjorie reached across the table and squeezed her hand. No words were needed. The court date loomed. But now Marjorie was no longer preparing to defend herself. She was preparing to be heard. No one stood when Marjorie entered the courtroom except Gregory. The room was plain wooden benches, beige walls, and tall windows where summer light spilled in like quiet judgment. The air carried a mixture of polish and unease. Marjorie walked slowly, the tap of her cane soft but certain. She took her place beside Gregory, who nodded once calm and prepared. Across the aisle, Natalie sat straight-backed in a navy blazer, her face unreadable. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't react. She didn't look at Marjorie. Judge Sims entered without ceremony. His robe slightly askew, his eyes tired but sharp. "Let's begin." Natalie's lawyer opened first. "My client, Ms. Natalie Bennett, has filed this petition out of concern. Her mother, Marjorie Bennett, has shown patterns of forgetfulness, misplacing items, repeated phone calls, confusion about financial matters. She fears her mother may be vulnerable to manipulation or worse, self-harm." Marjorie didn't flinch. Gregory's hand rested near hers, but did not touch. Next, Gregory stood. "We are not here to deny age. We are here to confirm capacity. Mrs. Bennett is of sound mind. She remembers not only dates and names, but patterns, intentions, and importantly, violations of trust. We present this not to discredit her daughter, but to defend her dignity." Judge Sims gave a brief nod. "Proceed with your evidence." Gregory submitted Martin's written statement. Then, on a mounted tablet, Ava connected a video call. Martin appeared, his shirt a bit wrinkled, his voice clear. "I've known Marjorie since 85. She remembers the cat I had in 97, the time I fell on the porch, and she brings lemon bars every 4th of July. That woman is sharper than I am." The courtroom chuckled lightly. Even the judge cracked a faint smile. "Thank you, Mr. Martin," the judge said. Then Ava stepped forward with a flash drive. The court clerk inserted it, and the room fell silent as the audio played. Natalie's voice echoed through the speakers, tight annoyed. "Just sign it, Mom. It's for your own good." Another voice, unfamiliar female firm, said, "Just mark here, Mrs. Bennet." There was hesitation. Then Marjorie's voice, trembling but resolute. I don't know. Shouldn't Gregory see this?" The clip ended. The judge looked toward Natalie. Her hands remained folded. She offered no expression, no denial. Just silence. Judge Sims adjusted his glasses and turned to Marjorie. "Mrs. Bennet, would you like to speak?" She stood slowly. Not once did she glance at Natalie. "I am not here to reclaim money, or houses, or names on documents. I am here because I was being erased, quietly, softly, as if I had already gone." She took a breath, steady and full. "I'm not here to fight. I just want back the right to be myself." She sat down. The only sound was the shift of fabric on wooden seats. Judge Sims tapped his notes, once looked over the bench, and then said simply, "Mrs. Marjorie Bennet retains full legal guardianship over herself and all associated assets." No applause, no gasps, just the sound of summer wind brushing against old glass. And Marjorie sitting a little taller, her hands still and strong in her lap. When Marjorie stepped into the hallway, the silence clung to her like a second skin. Her footsteps echoed slightly on the hardwood floor as she passed the familiar threshold of Natalie's old room. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing an empty space. The dresser was bare. The bookshelf, once cluttered with teenage novels and college textbooks, now stood hollow. The bed, stripped of linens, had only the faint imprint of where someone had once rested. No note. No goodbye. The last time Natalie had left this house without a word, she was 16, angry and proud. And once again she'd disappeared, leaving nothing but an emptiness deeper than silence. Sunlight filtered through the dusty window pane, cutting long golden streaks across the floor. Marjorie walked slowly to the edge of the room and stood by the desk. She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing the smooth wood, as if hoping to feel some trace of warmth, some sign of return. Behind her, Ava stood in the doorway, watching gently. "Ba ko tiek kong?" She asked, her voice no louder than the wind brushing past the gutters outside. Marjorie didn't turn around. "I regret everything that happened," she said simply. "But not what I did." There was no triumph in her tone, only the rawness of truth. She sat on the edge of the bed, the springs groaning under her weight, and gazed at the small corkboard still pinned with fading theatre tickets, a yellowing postcard from Paris, and a dried daisy pressed flat. Her phone buzzed softly. It was Gregory. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "Are you holding up all right?" "I am," she answered after a pause. "It's quiet now. Maybe it's time to start over," Gregory offered gently. "With yourself. On your terms." Marjorie nodded, though he couldn't see her. Maybe. When the call ended, she remained seated a while longer. Then she rose, walked over to the mantel in the living room, and removed the family portrait from its hook. Her fingers moved carefully as she pried open the back of the frame. 3 figures smiled from the photo herself, Harold and Natalie. She slipped out the photograph and, with deliberate care, cut it down the side, separating Harold and herself from the image of their daughter. She placed the smaller half, with just the 2 of them, into a new frame, setting it gently atop the mantel. Natalie's image she folded in half and tucked into the bottom drawer of the old roll-top desk. She turned to leave, but something pulled her back. She opened the drawer again, rummaging through papers until her hand froze on a weathered envelope. Her name was scrawled across the front in Natalie's handwriting, postmarked 2006, unsent. Marjorie's fingers trembled as she lifted it. She didn't open it yet. She simply held it in her palm, feeling the weight of what could have been said and what was never meant to be heard. I hate you because you're always right. I hate you because you don't need me. I'm afraid of you. The words bled from the page, each line in Natalie's jagged handwriting, tilting downward as if weighed down by years of silence. Marjorie sat on the porch, the crispness of early autumn curling gently around her shoulders. A shawl was draped over her lap, and in her hands the letter trembled only slightly. She read slowly, stopping at each sentence not to analyze but to absorb. No salt of tears marked her cheeks. No sigh escaped her lips, only the occasional blink. She wrote this in 2006, she said aloud, though no one was around yet. The ink had faded in places, but not enough to blur the pain. Ava stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea. Barvanojai and Marjorie looked up and nodded. She handed Ava the letter, watching the girl's brows furrow as she read. Natalie had written of loneliness, of the ballet recital, of the birthday forgotten. But most striking was a line near the end. If one day you ever need me, knock 3 times. A child's signal. A secret code. An olive branch buried beneath years of resentment. Ava looked at her grandmother. Bako jin viet thu traloi hong. Marjorie took the cup, warming her fingers. She stared out past the yard, where the apple tree had begun shedding its leaves in quiet abandon. No, she said softly, but I will keep the promise. The wind rustled through the branches. A single red leaf landed on the porch step and stayed. That evening, as Marjorie sipped her second cup of tea, a chill began to settle across the house. She stood turned off the hallway light and padded toward the bedroom. But just as her hand reached for the doorknob, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps. She froze. Her heart began to race, not with fear, but something more tender. She opened the door. No one stood there. Only a small parcel hung carefully from the knob. She brought it inside, unwrapped the paper slowly. Inside the red scarf, washed, folded, neatly placed atop a single dried sprig of apple blossom. No note, no name. Only the silence that said more than any apology ever could. I can't offer advice, but I can offer space to tell your story. Marjorie's voice carried softly across the small room, not loud, but certain. The circle of chairs in the town library's back meeting room creaked slightly as older bodies shifted, some unsure, some already leaning forward, as if they'd waited years to be invited to speak. Sunlight filtered gently through the large arched window behind her, casting dappled light across a poster board that read, in Ava's neat handwriting, the archive of the forgotten mothers. Listening circle, sharp. It was a modest turnout. 3 guests had shown up. Ruth, a stooped woman in her 80s, with thin white curls and a pearl brooch. Carl, whose hearing aid buzzed faintly when the room grew too silent. And Mrs. Diaz, who sat clutching a manila envelope but hadn't spoken a word yet. Ava sat to the side with a small handheld recorder and a spiral-bound notebook, glancing at her grandmother every so often for guidance. Marjorie had asked her not to intervene unless necessary. This was not therapy. It was testimony. I didn't know if anyone would come. Marjorie began again, her hands resting on the same red scarf that now lay folded neatly across her lap. But even one voice is worth making space for. She looked around the circle. The silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. I'll start, she said. Not because my story is the most painful, but because I want to go first and break the quiet." Her words were steady, though her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded a small piece of paper. She didn't read from it. She simply held it like a talisman. "I raised a daughter who thought I loved my work more than her. Maybe I did at times. Maybe I thought love meant providing and protecting, not always being present." And years passed. Then one day I stood at her wedding, not as her mother, but as a prop to be tolerated. I was called old, smelly, and I left. Ruth inhaled sharply but said nothing. Carl looked down at his hands. "I'm not here to accuse," Marjorie said. "I'm here because I believe memory matters, especially when no one asks us what we remember." Ava pressed record. There was a pause, and then Ruth cleared her throat. "I haven't spoken about this," she said, almost apologetically. "But last year my grandson posted a photo of me online, one where I looked confused at a grocery store. He thought it was funny, called me a wandering ghost. It went viral." She blinked twice, her eyes glossed. No one asked if I was okay. I wasn't confused. I was looking for a card. For my husband. It was our anniversary. Marjorie nodded gently. "Would you like to tell us about him?" Ruth looked surprised by the question. Then her shoulders dropped and she smiled faintly. "Robert. He died in 2019. I still set out his cup in the morning." A rustle beside her, Carl had pulled out a folded slip of paper from his coat pocket. "I wrote my will in 2004, he began, his voice hoarse. "My daughter helped me. Or so I thought. 2 months ago, I found a new version in my lawyer's file, dated 2021, with my signature, but I don't remember signing anything that year." His hands shook. When I asked her, she said I was imagining things, like I'm just some old fool. Marjorie didn't interrupt, neither did Ava. The room held the grief without drowning in it. "I'm not here to punish her," Carl whispered. "I just want to be believed." Marjorie reached across the circle and gently placed her hand over his. "You are." A hush followed. Then from the corner, the faintest creak, Mrs. Diaz shifted in her seat, looking up. Her manila envelope slid slightly off her lap, but she caught it. "I don't know if I'm ready," she murmured, not to anyone in particular. "That's all right," Marjorie replied. "You don't have to speak today. Just being here means you've started." Ava glanced at the recorder. She didn't stop it. These moments were part of the archive, too. When the session ended, no one stood up right away. They sat as if the weight of being heard had surprised them more than they expected. Ruth gently dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Carl stared at his hands, then slowly smiled, as if realizing they still belonged to someone whose story mattered. Mrs. Diaz didn't speak. But before leaving, she placed the manila envelope on the center chair and walked out with a nod. Marjorie didn't open it right away. Some stories needed to rest before being received. "I'll label the recordings," Ava said softly as she began packing up. "And I'll transcribe them this week." Marjorie smiled at her granddaughter. "Let's give each one its own folder. A name, a date, a dignity." They moved slowly through the library's narrow hallway past rows of dusty books and portraits of long-retired mayors. At the front desk, the librarian, a woman with grey streaks and kind eyes, offered a nod. "Same time next week?" she asked. Marjorie nodded. "If they come, we'll be here." Back home, the afternoon sun had dipped behind the row of maple trees that lined her street. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon from the tea Ava had made that morning. But Marjorie walked past the kitchen, past the living room, and into the spare bedroom. What once was Natalie's room, now repurposed into a small workspace. There, beside a neatly stacked pile of manila folders and a second-hand printer Ava had brought over, sat a thick envelope, labeled in Ava's handwriting, Archive Session 1, verified. Marjorie placed the envelope from Mrs. Diaz beside it. She didn't open it. Not yet. But she took a small, sticky note and gently wrote, Diaz. Undated story. To be honoured? She stuck it to the front and tucked it into the drawer labelled Pending Testimonies. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up a blank document. At the top, she typed in bold, The Archive of the Forgotten Mothers. Founding Manifesto. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, and then she began typing slowly. This is not a charity. This is not a clinic. This is not a stage. This is a quiet room, with a door open wide for anyone who has been erased by time, dismissed by family, or silenced by youth. We are not here to be rescued. We are here to remember out loud. She paused, reread it, and smiled faintly. Later that evening, Ava returned from the store with a second bookshelf. They're going to come, aren't they? She asked, setting the flat-pack box down. Marjorie didn't hesitate. Yes. Because silence is heavy, and someone always wants to put it down. Ava looked toward the growing archive and whispered, We'll need more shelves. They both laughed, soft, knowing laughter. The kind you share when something painful is finally shifting into purpose. As the stars rose outside and a breeze moved the sheer curtains ever so slightly, Marjorie walked over to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an empty folder. She labelled it Volume 1. And underneath, in smaller print, We were never invisible. Then she placed the red scarf beside it, not as evidence, but as a seal. The chair had always faced the wall. For years, its faded fabric soaked in silence, stationed like a forgotten monument to surrender. But this morning, Marjorie turned it gently, inch by inch, until it faced the window. She didn't push it all the way into the sun, just close enough for the light to touch the armrest and dance across the frayed threads of its pattern. Outside, the maple leaves had turned brittle gold, carpeting the lawn in a hush that only late autumn knows. A breeze slipped in through the half-open window, stirring the curtain just slightly. Ava arrived with a small bundle tied with navy ribbon. It's ready? She said softly, placing the bundle in Marjorie's lap. It was the first printed edition of their collection, The Archive of the Forgotten Mothers. 32 pages, 4 stories, each one told not to provoke, but to exist. Marjorie traced the names on the contents page. Ruth, Carl, Mrs. Diaz, and a note from Ava herself titled Listening as Inheritance. She turned to the final entry. Mr. Martin's voice captured and transcribed. Silence is like dust. You don't notice it until it blankets everything. Then one day someone sneezes, and suddenly the whole room remembers to breathe. Marjorie smiled, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. Do you want to add anything to the next edition? Ava asked. Marjorie didn't answer with words. She stood slow and deliberate and walked toward the chair by the window. With both hands, she folded the red scarf, now clean, softened by age, and laid it gently across the armrest. Here, she said, this seat is for the one who's not ready yet, but someday they might be. Ava stepped beside her. For Natalie, she asked. Marjorie didn't flinch. For anyone who carries a story they still fear to tell. They stood in silence. Outside, a bird sang a quick trill, then a pause, then a second note that echoed the first. That afternoon they added a new note to the archive reserved seat, facing the light. Days passed. The sun shifted lower, stretching shadows longer. The chair remained in place. Then one quiet Monday morning, as Ava sorted through mail on Marjorie's porch, she found a small brown parcel. No return address. Just her name handwritten in looping cursive. inside a single sheet of paper folded once. The writing trembled slightly, but the voice was unmistakable. If you're still willing to listen, I think I'm finally ready to begin. Natalie Ava looked up. Marjorie was sitting by the window, a cup of tea in hand, eyes closed, face turned toward the light. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Some stories take a lifetime to be heard. Some chairs wait decades to be filled. And some red scarves folded just right say everything that was ever left unsaid. She never shouted. She never begged. Yet in the end, the chair by the window no longer faced the wall, and that was victory enough. Justice may arrive quietly without applause, but when it comes, it restores more than rights, it restores dignity. Some betrayals are born from silence, but so is courage. Have you ever had to fight for your voice to be heard? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. Heavy stories for more tales that honor quiet strength.